You're listening to Mando Radio. Welcome to episode number 4, A New Mando. I'm entitling this episode A New Mando as we continue our series of revisiting the prequel trilogy and original trilogy. So today we're going to be discussing A New Hope. But first, how you doing, Pops?
Pretty good. How are you?
Very well, thank you so much for asking. Excited for The Mandalorian. It's days away.
I know, actually, feels like it's just hours away, but
The weekend flies by. It will
be.
amounted to approximately a few hours.
Yep.
So, very, very, very excited. Looking forward to that launching. 9 a.m. on Tuesday. The day after, we call it Remembrance Day, but Memorial Day in the U.S.?
I'm not sure,
What do
actually.
they call it again?
Do they call it Armistice Day? No, I don't remember what they call it.
We're Canadian, if you couldn't tell,
Yeah,
by the way.
should be obvious. Hey.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in. We realize that we are Canada. We are 10% of the population of the United States. So the probability of you listening to this and being from the United States is very high.
Yes.
10 to 1.
Okay.
So we welcome you. We're going to start out with some news and updates about The Mandalorian. The whole reason why we're here, the whole reason why this podcast exists is to explore The Mandalorian. We're going to get very, very deep into it when the show starts. Until then, we have clips and trailers and previews and things. So we have just 3 hours ago posted to Twitter, The Mandalorian's, the show's official Twitter feed, a couple of Q&A with the cast of The Mandalorian. It's a brief clip. We're going to watch it, and we'll be right back to discuss it. What did you think?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, that's one way to promote it, letting people know who are the faces of the show and giving them a little something to say, trying to build up some excitement for the launch.
What I liked about what Pedro said is that the world that we're going to see is not clearly delineated good and evil. It was pretty obvious right off the bat in A New Hope that the Empire was evil because they're catching up to the Corellian Corvette, they're shooting all the rebel troopers, Darth Vader's choking the captain.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was pretty black and white.
Yeah,
it was pretty clear.
Pretty obvious.
Who the bad dudes are.
Yep.
And this is not going to have that in a post-Empire world, especially on the Outer Rim. It's going to be murky,
Mm-hmm.
which I find that exciting.
Yep.
That's going to be fun. All right, so that's the news for today about The Mandalorian. Next up, we're going to continue our series of checking in with the main cast of The Mandalorian. Our next person is Carl Weathers. Carl Weathers was born on January 14th, 1948 in New Orleans, Louisiana. A famous and successful football star at San Diego State, he played with the Oakland Raiders and retired from the sport in 1974. Whoops, I lost my spot. In order to give full attention to his goal to be a real actor. Weathers first played small parts in 2 films, both made in 1975. However, his big break came the following year when producers Irwin Winkler and Robert Chartoff chose him to play Apollo Creed in the blockbuster sleeper Rocky. Real-life boxing legend Ken Norton was originally signed for the part, but it eventually went to Weathers. He went on to play Creed in 3 other Rocky movies, and the character's adversarial relationship eventually evolved into a warm friendship. After Creed's death in Rocky IV, Weathers met with producer Joel Silver and agreed to play an important supporting role in Predator, an action film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then after that, he's done TV specials. He did an Adam Sandler comedy, Happy Gilmore. Hulk Hogan, Shadow Warriors, and now this. So he's been kind of flying under the radar of critical acclaim and of fandoms and things, kind of since Predator, I guess. People that are Predator fans love Predator.
Right.
So that's kind of cool. I didn't know that he played football though.
Yeah, before his acting. I didn't know that either.
That's interesting. Oh, he also played for a CFL team too. He played for the BC Lions from 71 to 73.
Oh, okay.
Played linebacker in 18 games and wore number 55.
That's cool.
That is cool. Oh, this is interesting. This is just a little blurb, but apparently he based Apollo Creed on Muhammad Ali. I can kind of see some of the similarities in the large, oversized
Persona. Yeah, exactly. The ego.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's neat. It's cool to see him in this. Excited to see where that goes. And the footage that we watched the other night of that they showed at Celebration, we got a little taste of what he's bringing to the character and to the role.
Yep.
Yeah. And did we watch the interview together? I can't recall which interviews we've watched together. No, we didn't. We didn't watch it together. Jon Favreau, when he was talking to Carl Weathers about the role, kind of just wanted it to be, at first, just like a couple episodes, just a very small role. And then the more, concurrently, as he's having brief conversations with Carl Weathers, and as they're writing the story of the show, of the series, the role expands and grows. And as he's having these conversations, Carl's like, well, you're leading me on. Like, what are we doing here? And eventually it's like, no, we want you to be a big part of this.
Right.
The character that we're building for you, around you, is going to be a big part of it. So his character is the Bounty Hunters Guild, like boss.
Yeah.
So very, very cool.
Yep.
Glad to have him aboard on the show. All right. Now we're going to move on to the next portion of our show. We're going to talk about our reflections, thinking back on Star Wars, which in 1977 was called Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Was it not?
Yep.
It wasn't until, the VHS release, people started calling it A New Hope?
Yep.
Because there was no, at the time, there was no expectation. The studio wasn't planning on making a trilogy. It wasn't until the success of Star Wars A New Hope, then it became a trilogy, became possible to become a trilogy. So let's start with you, Pops. When you think of Star Wars, what do you think of?
I think of seeing that movie a bunch of times back in 77. I think that it was like a surprise in the sense that it was just a lot of fun. I mean, for the time, they were good special effects. I mean, it was kind of cool how they were able to do the scenes in space and everything, and the planets and the ships and stuff like that. I don't know, it just was kind of groundbreaking in many ways. I mean, the only thing comparable to it would have been 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was, several years before, and obviously was a little more cerebral and not, frankly, as much fun. Still interesting, visually interesting, an interesting story, but this one just felt like a Saturday afternoon movie that you would go see with a fun story and interesting characters.
Awesome. So let's bounce some other movies off of you. I'm looking at a list of the highest grossing films from 1977.
Right.
So the first movie is Star Wars.
Obviously.
The second movie is Smokey and the Bandit.
Yep.
Did you see that?
Nope.
The next movie is Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yes.
You saw that one?
Yep.
Okay. Next one is Saturday Night Fever, John Travolta.
I don't remember if I saw it or not, but everyone knows the music. Like
Sure.
Bee Gees, right?
Yeah, everyone knows the music.
Yeah.
The next one is called The Goodbye Girl. No.
Nope.
Next one is A Bridge Too Far.
Definitely. That was an interesting war movie about the campaign in Holland.
Okay.
Yep, in World War II.
Next one is The Deep.
That was like a horror flick. I don't remember seeing that.
Next one is The Spy Who Loved Me, James Bond.
Yeah, the James Bond movies. Yep.
You would have seen that one?
Yep.
Yeah. And then the last two, we'll skip those two because they're. Yeah, we'll skip them.
Okay.
So interesting. So of the ones that you remember seeing
Mm-hmm.
in 1977,
Right.
would you have said that Star Wars was your favorite at that time?
Yeah, I would say it was. I would say that it was.
Of that list, are there are any of those films ones that you've seen as many times as you did Star Wars back then?
No, Close Encounters of the Third Kind I've probably seen a few times, and that one's kind of a fun movie, but not nearly as many times as Star Wars. I don't know if there's anything else on that list that I would have seen more than once or twice, really. Just probably those two.
Not even A Bridge Too Far?
Bridge Too Far, I remember going to see it, and then I think I got the VHS tape when it came out. But yeah, I only saw it once in the theater, when that certainly was not the case with Star Wars.
That movie is stacked. Do you know who stars in that? Do you remember?
It's a pretty stellar crew. I mean,
Top build.
yeah,
Very expensive to make
Yeah.
this movie.
yeah.
Sean Connery, Anthony Hopkins, Gene Hackman, Michael Caine.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, it was big. It was a big movie. I think I remember getting the soundtrack to it as well.
I don't think I've seen A Bridge Too Far.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. What else?
I think it's A Bridge Too Far was kind of a follow-on years later to The Longest Day. I don't know if you've seen The Longest Day. So it's basically the story of D-Day. And again, a huge international cast there. So that you've got Germans playing Germans and Brits and Americans playing Brits and Americans. And it's a long movie, but it's based on a book by Cornelius Ryan. And it really does walk you through what happened in the preparation to D-Day, the paratroopers that were dropped in the night before the actual landing on the beaches. And so, I mean, I think A Bridge Too Far was kind of like that. They tried to do it like that with, a big, well-known crew
Wow.
that were, that they'd hired to be the actors for that.
Very impressive. So for me, one of the things that I think about when we're talking about A New Hope, obviously my first exposure was watching it on VHS, not watching it at the theater.
Mm-hmm.
However, in 1995, I did get to watch it in the theater when Special Edition came out.
Right.
So that was awesome getting to see it.
Some movies you've got to see them on the big screen.
At least once in your life.
Yeah.
You've got to, if you haven't yet, if you're listening to this and you're in your 20s, you haven't seen the original trilogy on the big screen yet.
Mm-hmm.
If there's ever one of those special nights at the movie theater nearby where they buy the rights to show the original trilogy on the big screen, do it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
As the Emperor would say, do it.
Yeah.
You have to go and see it. It's so worth it.
Yeah.
But when we talk about like the cast and the story and the actors, I'm enamored with Alec Guinness and his portrayal of Obi-Wan Kenobi. I found a really interesting interview with him on an old British talk show. It's a 4-minute clip. I'm going to play it for Pops. I'm not going to be able to keep the audio in for you guys. But it's just fascinating the way he talks about it, the way that George Lucas approached him for the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi, how he explains it to him. And the movie, honestly, would not be the same if it was not for Alec Guinness.
Mm-hmm.
Just the way that it turned out.
Yeah.
Having Alec Guinness there with that calm confidence, just totally in the role. Although he dismisses it in the interview and says like, oh, it's just silly kind of fun. But like he portrayed that like hundreds of years of Jedi training, although Obi-Wan wasn't 100 years old, but that's kind of like steeped in that kind of history, but expressing it just through his portrayal of a character. So.
Right. Well, and he brings gravitas to the movie too. I mean, just the role that he plays and the way he inhabits that role. I mean, It wouldn't be the same without him.
No.
Wouldn't be.
No. All right. So we're gonna watch a quick little clip. I can link it. I'll link it in the show notes. I'll link it. I'll throw it up on our Facebook page too.
Okay.
So people can watch what we're about to watch. Here we go. Just found it fascinating.
Yeah.
Really good storyteller too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that was a good one. And I liked what he said, how he described what he got out of it, what he enjoyed about it, and what he appreciated about it being very innocent for 77.
Yeah.
And some of the movies that we listed there were the complete opposite, right? So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, no, that was nice.
So it's a shame to see him go, but rest in peace, Sir Alec Guinness.
Yep. Well, and again, it's good that they had someone of that stature in the movie. Honestly, I mean, he's a fabulous actor. You think of him in terms of Shakespeare and stuff, not Star Wars, but the fact that he was in this one, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the next one.
Yep.
Yeah. And the last one. Briefly.
Yeah, briefly.
As a ghost.
Yeah.
For just a second.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to throw it over to you, Pops.
Okay.
You have a couple more things to discuss about A New Hope?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to comment on as well was the soundtrack, the music.
Score.
The score, okay. Technically the score.
Someone's going to comment and say, you guys are supposed to call it the
you
score.
You guys are pretty... yeah. So as we had mentioned previously, we can thank John Williams for doing the film score. And, we'd mentioned many awards that John has won. 51 Academy Award nominations. And, when you think of his music, it is so iconic. You think of movies like the Star Wars series, or you think of Jaws, like all you have to hear is two notes and you know what it is, right? I mean, some of that music is just so well known. Obviously, critically acclaimed. And so what I thought was interesting is as someone who speaks Spanish, I have an app that I like to listen to that has these radio stations from Spain. And there's this show on one of their main radio stations, and it's called Gente Despierta, Gentedespierta. And the previous season, they've changed it up a little bit for this season, but the previous season, the host had a guest on once a week. And that guest is still the director of something called the Film Symphony Orchestra. His name is Constantino Martinez Orts. And so when he would come on his segments on this show, he was always talking about film music, obviously, because he's with the Film Symphony Orchestra. And he spent multiple segments looking at the contributions of John Williams. And I just found it fascinating. I mean, he would spend 1 or 2 whole episodes just talking about the Star Wars music that Williams composed. And so this gentleman, as the director, last year was taking the orchestra around to all kinds of places in Spain and Portugal, just doing the music of John Williams exclusively. And I just found it interesting to think about the fact that I'm listening to this podcast, radio broadcast to keep up my Spanish, and thoroughly enjoying this guy from Spain who, is directing an orchestra talking about music that I love. I mean, it was fabulous. And he mentions, the fact that you can see the influence of the great composers on John Williams. So, for example, in terms of the Star Wars music, the influence of Wagner, in the sense that there are motifs or themes that go with individuals in the movie, right? So you hear a theme and that's
Princess
Leia, or that's Luke, or that's Darth Vader, and that's very much what you get with Wagner in his opera works. And so it was interesting to listen to a musician's analysis. And this is an individual who has also composed music for films too. So he's on the younger side, but he definitely appreciates John Williams' contribution. So I don't know. I just thought that I would mention that it was just kind of drove home to me again that this is absolutely a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, you wouldn't think, oh, okay, so this Spanish composer and music director is traveling around Spain and Portugal playing these shows that exclusively have John Williams music, but that's the level that John Williams is at. So I mean, I just wanted to throw that out there. I mean, we instinctively we know, oh yeah, it's popular because of the money that it's made, but it's definitely not just a North American phenomenon. I mean, it's something that is popular around the world. I mean, I remember. So I have a friend who lives in Japan, and he knows that we love Star Wars, and so when the new movies were coming out after the initial trilogy,
The
right?
prequels were coming
Yeah,
out.
when the prequels came out, he would send us material related to Star Wars in Japan, and it's fascinating. It just is interesting the effect that it has had around the world and its popularity. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to mention that in terms of John Williams' music, amazing contribution to the series, absolutely. And I mean, I remember as a kid, I'm pretty sure I had the soundtrack from Star Wars, so from A New Hope, on cassette. Don't know if I still have that somewhere.
I have that.
And I know that you have the vinyl as well. So very popular music. And it's funny because I mentioned 2001: A Space Odyssey. Probably the second record that I ever owned was actually the soundtrack to 2001. And you may or may not know that one of the popular pieces on there is actually the Blue Danube Waltz, which they play while you see the ship kind of spinning through space. And I think to some extent that contributed to my interest and appreciation for classical music. And again, you look at the symphonic music that John Williams composed for Star Wars, that's right up there with classical music. I mean, it's based on things that you'll see with Wagner, things that you'll see with Holz's Planets. So, yeah, I mean, had a big influence, certainly, on me.
Definitely. The 2001 LP is right behind you, and I have that cassette tape of the Star Wars
Yeah.
A New Hope soundtrack.
Yeah.
I just had it in my hand the other day.
Yeah.
I'll find it for you.
Okay.
So you can look for it after we're done.
Yep.
But as a aspiring musician, I won't call myself a full-blown musician yet because I can't really read music. But I really appreciate what you were saying about this Spanish composer, because what I feel like he's doing is he's kind of going through the generations, through time. John Williams is still alive. He's still on the earth. He's still creating.
Yep.
It's more accessible to connect with someone whose work you admire while they're still around,
Mm-hmm.
and who's still at it. You can still see examples of their craft. You can go on YouTube and watch videos and watch John Williams conduct the orchestra
Mm-hmm.
and learn from him. And I do the same thing. As I was learning guitar, I play guitar. I started learning from someone that was close to my contemporary, someone that was just like a generation ahead. And then you can appreciate even more what came before that.
Mm-hmm.
And then that makes it easier to appreciate more what came before that.
Right.
Until you get back to like what Chuck Berry was doing,
Mm-hmm.
as you go through guitar, rock and roll history, guitar
Right.
history, and things like that.
Yep.
So I really, I get it, because that opens the door, that opens the path to go back a level to the great composers from
Mm-hmm.
200 years ago
Right.
or more.
Yep.
Makes it more accessible. You can pick up on it. You can understand it better through that perspective of someone that's closer to your contemporary,
Mm-hmm.
that's been influenced by that.
Well, and even just making those connections, like recognizing sometimes you hear some of the Star Wars themes and you go, oh, that sounds like this or that, and you kind of know, instinctively kind of what John Williams was basing that music on.
Mhm.
So,
Right. Like when I was growing up and I was listening to Weezer a lot, it wasn't until I actually learned on guitar how to play it that I realized that they lifted so much from Kiss.
Mm-hmm.
Rivers Cuomo lifted so much of the Blue Album from Kiss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same. Not as obviously as prestigious, not classical music, but
Well, I mean, I
it's
don't
my
know that
music, right?
yeah, it's not that it's prestigious. I mean, it's older, definitely. But yeah, I mean, I think that classical music has got more years behind it, and when you think about it as well, I mean, I guess it's just something that's always kind of been there for me, something that I enjoyed, and this certainly fed into that.
Yeah, yeah. And this kind of theme is kind of learning from the past masters is what A New Hope is all about. Luke learning from Obi-Wan,
Mm-hmm.
going on a journey to learn from Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a big theme, and I read a really nice article. It wasn't totally accurate or anything, but I read a really nice article today about Dave Filoni, and it was that first kind of pop culture available piece that I've seen that actually recognizes him as being under George Lucas's wing and learning at his side. And they spelled it out. It was for 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
From the time that the Clone Wars began production, the animated series, to the time that George sold Lucasfilm, that was 8 years of Dave Filoni working with George Lucas.
Right.
So, yeah, learning from past masters.
Yep.
Something to be said
Exactly.
in becoming master of your craft.
Yep.
So, there you go. Anything else you'd love to discuss about Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope? What do you think about the changes from Special Edition?
I mean, I kind of liked some of the changes they did for Special Edition.
I know you liked the one where they put that scene back in with Han and Jabba talking.
Yeah, where he walks over. Yeah, he literally walks over Jabba's tail. I mean, I don't know. I liked that. I enjoyed that. I thought it was nice that they could go back and fix some of the things that they couldn't do that well with the technology in 77, right? I mean, it wasn't, they didn't completely redo it. They were just like little tweaks, and they even themselves, like George and others, recognized, oh, there's some things here that, we could probably fix. And so it was I think it was nice that they did that.
Yeah, like the establishing shot showing the rebel forces flying around Yavin, because they couldn't establish that. They couldn't get that many models. They probably didn't have the budget to make that many X-wings and Y-wings and then film them.
Yeah.
Or they would have had to have been at a scale that was too small to make them a practical shot. And then I loved Mos Eisley because George explained that he wanted it to be like a bustling, busy place, but it's very sparse in the first cut.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, and then they add in all the creatures and the stuff that's happening. Yeah, exactly. Before they actually get to the cantina.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Big fan. I'm okay with it. I'm fine with Special Edition New Hope.
Yeah. Because that's 20 years later, more or less, right? 77 to 90. Okay, almost 18 years. So, in 18 years, technology has changed. What they can do with the camera has changed, and so.
And did they have it in widescreen in VHS prior to that? I'm gonna have to go back and look.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I want to say
the first release would have been 4:3 for television at the time.
Yeah.
But widescreen wouldn't have come along until later.
Yeah.
Later than 77,
right.
83.
Right, exactly.
All right. Ready for the big section of the show?
Yeah.
That was already a big section. This one's going to be just as big.
Okay.
Merch. Star Wars merchandise. This is what started it all. I didn't do all of the homework and research because there's just too much. There's too much. Did you have... We mentioned in a previous episode that you didn't buy the figures.
Nope.
Did you have any other Star Wars merch in 1977 or 1978 that you can recall? Bed sheets, toothbrushes, lunch boxes,
nope.
underoos.
Nope.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Nothing?
No. And again, I think the only thing I had was the soundtrack on cassette.
That's March.
Yeah. No, but I mean, like, so I didn't buy any of the figures. I didn't buy any of the vehicles. I didn't buy any of the other spin-off stuff. And yeah, I obviously should have. Hindsight is 2020.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
Because I mean, and I mentioned this before. I remember seeing them. I mean, there was a mall near us, and I'd go to the bookstore. There was a W.H. Smith, I think, and they had like a little rack. I remember, I can visually picture it, and they had all the little figures and stuff. And I remember thinking, oh, that's kind of cool. And I mean, back then, I don't know, what were they, like $2 or something?
$2 or $3.
$2 or $3, right? So it wasn't like a huge expense. So yeah, I definitely remember seeing them, and then when you guys came around and we were starting to collect the figures and the vehicles and stuff. I mean, it would have been nice if I'd had them from back then. Regrettably, I did not.
That's okay. Didn't you say your mom threw out a bunch of your stuff anyway?
Yeah, that was comic books, though. I had some Marvel comic books that were...
Did you have Star Wars comic books?
I don't remember.
Because that's a licensed item as well.
I know. I don't remember, actually. I remember the Marvel ones. I don't remember if I had Star Wars ones.
So I'm just passing over to Pops. Hasbro, just this year, 2019, earlier this year, re-released a line of figures. They call it the Retro Collection. So they took 3D scans of the original Kenner figures, slapped them on some cardboard and bubbles, and it looks very similar to what they looked like back in 1977.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can compare Chewbacca. I have a loose Chewbacca here. I think it's the Return of the Jedi Chewbacca, but it's the same mold.
Yeah.
And then we have a Vader here we can compare as well. So very, very cool. I have all of the Retro Collection figures. I need to get some plastic cases to protect them.
To protect those. That's cool.
The cards are not as sturdy as they need to be.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting too in those retro figures that they put the lightsabers like embedded in the figure's arms, and so there's like a little thing that you have to push down for the lightsaber to appear in his hand.
Yeah.
So yeah, interesting. And the vinyl capes, like if the figure had a cape or whatever, they were made of vinyl. So yep, interesting.
Very nice. Yep. So that's probably the merch that I was going to talk about is the figures, because this kind of started a phenomenon. Like, what other toys? I guess we could go back and watch the Netflix series, The Toys That Made Us, because they do a really good job of covering off all the different toys and series and things, but maybe like Transformers would have been as big. And G.I. Joes were huge.
Yeah,
too.
G.I. Joes were big then.
You had G.I. Joes?
Yep. Yeah.
But that was from before 77.
Yes.
When you were younger.
Yep.
So what would have been, if you can recall, what would have been the last toys you purchased or you got gifted to you as a youth?
I don't remember. I know, like, back then I was into building plastic models, so I had Tamiya models. But yeah, I don't remember actually.
Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, go and check out The Toys That Made Us on Netflix. They have a Star Wars episode where they talk about the prototypes. They used, what was it, Fisher Price? They used kids' toys basically to make the prototypes. Right. And then the whole story of how they made the figures, how they came about. Super, super cool. So yeah, I was on a big Marvel Legends kick, collecting lots of Marvel Legends. What's left is all up here if you're watching on YouTube. But lately, for some reason, I've fallen back into Star Wars 3 3/4 figures. So yeah, it's back.
Yep. Yeah.
I don't know why.
Well, and who knows what'll come out in December.
I already know.
right?
I've been paying attention.
Okay.
At the conventions in Europe, there
Mm.
was just some in the past couple of weeks.
Right.
They've been showing off what they're going to release.
Oh, okay.
So we already know for a fact in the new year, we're going to be getting 3 3/4 versions of The Mandalorian
Mm-hmm.
and of Cara Dune.
Right.
And of, they call them remnant stormtroopers.
Okay.
Which is the ones that we see here.
Yep.
And there's already on shelves. I saw it. I had it in my hand. I didn't buy it because it was $100. An ATST
Right.
from The Mandalorian.
Oh, okay.
Which we only see a very brief, like 1 second clip of in the trailers,
Mm-hmm.
where the ATST takes a step and blasts something.
Right.
So yeah. Christmas
Cool.
list.
Yes.
Christmas list.
Yep.
The ATST's on the Christmas
Oh,
list.
okay.
If my wife is listening. She's probably. Let's be honest. All right. Let's move on to the next portion of the show. Let's go to tech review. This is a big one. You could literally pick anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think what we need to discuss, because it comes up again and again now as a theme, I think we need to talk about the Death Star. At the time, was there anything else in pop culture that compared to the Death Star? Had you ever seen anything like that? Was there any science fiction that had anything like that? Like, I was thinking in my mind, I didn't say it, but like the hero's journey is like Frodo in The Lord of the Rings,
Mm-hmm.
right? That kind of mythology. King Arthur, the Sword and the Stone, right? Like, but there's never anything that can just completely wipe out a planet.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the first time that we've seen this? Where it actually does it?
Yeah, where it actually does it? Probably. I mean, I think, unfortunately, what comes to mind for me is atomic bombs, right? I mean, you recognize the fact that, they used atomic bombs at the end of World War II, and then there was the whole arms race. And so, yeah, I mean, the concept of destroying a planet probably was out there, but to see it happen in the movie, and I think that the Death Star is just, I mean, it's so impressive, right? I mean, basically, it looks like a planet.
The name is so appropriate too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Foreboding.
Yeah, yeah.
And the reason why I picked the Death Star to talk about is because it's been revisited so many times.
Mm-hmm.
The Death Star 2 in Return of the Jedi, Star Killer Base in Force Awakens, and then we go and we see the plans on Geonosis in Attack of the Clones,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's a huge focus of Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
The story of how the rebels were able to get the plans
Right.
to send them to Leia, who puts them in R2, and then they end up on Tatooine.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, just the Death Star is just amazing. Like, how George came up with that idea, no idea.
Mm-hmm.
But just brilliant. Loved it. Absolutely loved the Death Star. And now it's become its own thing. Like, if there's like a game of some kind, and there's a combination of characters that will complement each other really well, and it's hard to defeat that combination, people will give it the nickname, oh, here's the Death Star.
Right.
Because that group of characters
Mm-hmm.
is so difficult to defeat. It's kind of like Kleenex. Like, it's
Mhm.
become a completely different thing on its own.
Right.
It's not owned by Star Wars anymore.
No, exactly.
Instead of calling it a tissue, it's a Kleenex. Well,
Yep.
that's a brand name.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that thing's awesome. And what I really appreciated too, that I didn't know until The Force Awakens came out, is that the set that they built it in such a way that they could, in a small space, shoot from different angles and have a completely different backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
So they built just a small 2-hallway set, but the ending of each hallway, they would dress it differently, and the walls would have different designs. So within a sound studio in London, they could film and make it look like 8 different places in the Death Star,
Oh, okay.
all on one soundstage.
Right.
And the reason why I know about that, because I stumbled upon that in an article about The Force Awakens, because they did the same thing.
Oh, okay.
For Starkiller Base, where Rey is sneaking around, and Finn and Han and Chewie, they're all looking for her and stuff, they built a similar kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
Where there's the rock wall and there's the metal walls and stuff. They built it in a similar manner to what they found from the plans when they built A New Hope, the Death Star set. So that's pretty awesome.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And then, the big throwback in The Force Awakens, paying fan service to A New Hope, is when Finn asks Han Solo, what are we going to do with Captain Phasma? They've captured her. What are we going to do with her? And Han says, is there a garbage chute? Trash compactor?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was probably my favorite part of The
good.
Force Awakens.
Yeah.
Even more so than when Han and Chewie say we're home.
Mm-hmm.
It was when they do a garbage chute.
Yeah.
I thought that was great.
Yeah.
So, anything you'd like to share about the Death Star?
I don't know, did they have merch on the Death Star, in the sense that, they have the figures and the vehicles. They didn't create a Death Star
Playset?
or
They did.
Did they?
They did. I will show it to you.
It's
mostly cardboard.
Yeah, that's what I thought. They had some interesting vehicles or whatever that were or scenes.
No, there's a big plastic one too.
Is there a big plastic one too?
This one right here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but what I meant was, you know how, the vehicles are whole. They didn't create any kind of a Death Star per se. So the Death Star space station is just basically like that elevator shape. Yeah, like the hallway.
No.
Okay. So they didn't create it like they would have created some of the vehicles complete. It was just a scene in the Death Star. Okay.
That's
Right.
That's right. Yeah. Well, this is the Kenner Death Star.
Right.
That's the one I was thinking of.
Oh, okay.
It's like a cardboard diorama.
Yeah.
I think they did Bandai. I could be wrong. NPC. Someone did a model kit.
Right.
But it's very small.
Yeah,
scale.
it's small. It's not one that you could actually put the figures in or whatever.
No. But I think there was a carrying case.
Mm-hmm.
Like a Death Star.
Yes, I remember
carrying
seeing
case.
that. Yeah, that you could put the figures in.
Yeah. But no, nothing. So the closest thing actually that I've seen lately, which is kind of cool, if you're interested in this, is an IKEA lamp that looks like the Death Star right here. This one.
Oh my gosh!
So if you're feeling artsy, you can just draw the panel lines on it, and then it looks like you've got the Death Star exploding in your living room.
Oh, okay.
Or over your kitchen.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Okay.
Over your dining room table. So that's pretty cool. You could have an exploding Death Star.
Wow.
I like that one.
That's a funny idea.
I would do it.
Yep.
We should do it right here. We could replace this light with an exploding Death Star.
That's true. That would be good.
Let's do it. This one even has a little laser blast coming out of it.
Oh yeah.
That's good. Alright. Well, I think that's all I have for tonight.
Hmm?
Do you got anything else you'd like to share with us?
No, I think that's it. There's obviously a lot more we could say about episode 4. But again, the point is, let's look at the episodes that lead into the new series, The Mandalorian. So, I think that's good for now.
I think one thing that I want to mention, from what Jon Favreau has talked about in interviews, is that what he's doing when he writes, him and Dave Filoni, what they do when they write the show, is they bring in as much of what they love about Star Wars as they can.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple of clips, and this is more than Empire Strikes Back, but there's a couple of clips where you see technology and weapons, like the E-Web blaster. The Mandalorian's firing that big blaster cannon. They're borrowing things. So it's going to be really cool to see what comes out of A New Hope, and it's going to be like pausing the show every 5 seconds, like, oh, I remember where that came from and where that came from. Yeah, it's going to be hard to watch it once.
Yes.
It's going to be repeat viewing programming.
Yeah.
It's going to be a repeat viewing series.
Definitely.
All right, ready?
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining us.
We hope you'll join us next time.
The Force will be with you.
Always.